In a small, unassuming town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, stood the Aurora Theater. Built in the 1920s, it had once been the pride of the town. A lavish Art Deco masterpiece with golden chandeliers, velvet seats, and a reputation for screening the best films of its era. Over the decades, the theater fell into disrepair as multiplexes sprang up, but it remained open, a shadow of its former self. Rumors swirled about the Aurora. Some said it was cursed. Others whispered about strange disappearances, shadowy figures, and a projectionist who had never left the building, even in death. These stories didn't deter moviegoers entirely, but they added a chilling edge to the theater's already eerie atmosphere. One cold autumn evening, a group of friends decided to catch the late-night showing of an obscure horror film. There were 5 of them: Emma, the skeptic; Josh, the horror enthusiast; Mia, who scared easily but loved the thrill; Kevin, the prankster; and Sarah, who had a knack for sensing when something wasn't right. The marquee outside flickered with the title, The Last Reel. None of them had heard of it, but Josh insisted it was a cult classic. The cashier at the box office, an elderly woman with a vacant stare, handed them their tickets without a word. As they entered the theater, the air grew colder. The lobby was dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of mildew. A lone usher stood by the door, his face obscured by shadows. He gestured silently for them to enter. Inside, the auditorium was nearly empty, save for a few scattered patrons. Most sat slumped in their seats, faces turned toward the screen. The friends chose seats near the middle, joking about the theater's creepy vibe. As the lights dimmed and the film began, an uneasy silence fell over the group. The movie was strange, grainy, with distorted audio and unsettling imagery. Scenes of empty streets, flickering lights, and shadowy figures played out without explanation. The pacing was slow, almost hypnotic, but there was something deeply unnerving about it. Halfway through, Kevin leaned over to Emma. "This is so boring," he whispered. Before she could respond, a loud, distorted scream erupted from the screen. It was so sudden and jarring that the entire group jumped. The screen went black for a moment, and when the picture returned, the camera was zoomed in on the audience. The friends stared in disbelief. The image on the screen was a live feed of the auditorium, showing them and the other patrons sitting in their seats. "Is this part of the movie?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. Josh shrugged, but even he looked uneasy. The camera on the screen panned slowly across the room, lingering on each person. The other patrons didn't react, their faces blank and expressionless. When the camera reached the group, the friends froze. "That's us," Emma whispered. The image lingered on their terrified faces before cutting to black again. The sound of static filled the room, growing louder and louder until it was almost unbearable. Then, silence. The screen flickered back to life, showing a dimly lit hallway. The camera moved as if someone were holding it, walking slowly toward a door at the end. The friends recognized the hallway. It was the one leading to the projection room. "I don't like this," Sarah said, clutching Mia's arm. The camera reached the door and paused. A hand, pale and skeletal, reached out and pushed it open. The projection room was empty, save for an old reel-to-reel projector spinning noiselessly. The camera panned across the room before focusing on a dusty mirror hanging on the wall. In the reflection, a figure stood behind the camera. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a wide, unnatural grin. Suddenly, the screen went dark again, and the theater lights flickered. "We need to leave," Sarah said, standing up. As the group rose from their seats, they noticed something chilling. The other patrons hadn't moved. Their heads were now turned toward the group, their blank faces illuminated by the dim light. "Run!" Josh shouted. They bolted for the exit, but the door wouldn't budge. Kevin pounded on it, but it was as if the door had been welded shut. The lights flickered again, and a low, guttural laugh echoed through the room. "Who's there?" Emma shouted, her voice shaking. The laughter grew louder, and the friends turned to see the figure from the mirror standing in the aisle. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, as if it were a puppet on invisible strings. "Stay together!" Josh yelled as the group huddled close. The figure began to move toward them, its grin widening impossibly. The other patrons rose from their seats, their movements slow and mechanical. Desperate, the friends ran toward the stage, hoping to find another exit. As they climbed onto the platform, the screen flickered back to life. It now showed them, scrambling and panicked, from the perspective of the figure. "It's watching us," Mia sobbed. Kevin spotted a door behind the screen and yanked it open. The group rushed through, finding themselves in the same hallway they had seen on the screen earlier. "This way," Sarah shouted, leading them toward the projection room. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in around them. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, growing closer with each passing second. They finally reached the projection room and slammed the door shut. Inside, the old projector continued to spin, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "What do we do now?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the mirror on the wall shattered, and the figure stepped through the broken glass. The room filled with static, and the friends' screams were drowned out as the screen in the auditorium showed the final scene: 5 empty seats in the middle of the theater. The next morning, the theater was empty, the seats pristine, as if no one had been there the night before. The Aurora's doors remained locked, the marquee blank. Months later, when the theater was finally demolished, workers found an old film reel labeled "The Last Reel." Curious, one of them took it home and played it. The footage was grainy, but unmistakable. It showed 5 terrified friends running through the Aurora Theater, forever trapped in its cursed halls.